Díomh agus fáilte to episode 1 of the Crazy House Prices podcast with me, Ciarán Mulqueen. If you don't know who I am, I run the Crazy House Prices Instagram page. Today is a conversation I had with Dr. Lorcan Sirr, who is the Senior Lecturer for Housing in TUD. I recorded this podcast for my Patreon, and I wanted to share with you guys on the main podcast now as the first episode because I think it is such an important conversation and I think people need to hear the facts and the figures in this conversation. And after the chat with Lorcan, then I will run through some of the questions that you guys sent in. So without further wait or listening to me bang on, here is my chat with Lorcan Sirr. Now, patrons, I am very happy to say Lorcan Sirr has agreed to come on and talk with me about housing and educate us all on everything that's going on in housing. So hello, Lorcan, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hi, Ciarán. A pleasure to be here. I don't follow you on Twitter because I gave up Twitter a few years ago, but I hear you're very popular and successful, so that's great. I'm delighted to be here and have a chat with you about this.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know about popular or successful, but it gets a lot of interaction anyway. So I suppose we just might have a quick chat about why we are where we are in terms of the housing market, where you think the solutions lie, and your prediction, as everyone will always ask, for the next couple of years. Where are we going to go in terms of house prices and government policy as well, and all the rest? And I know you lecture in TUD, so for once my patrons don't have to listen to someone uneducated and unqualified talking shite, but they can actually listen to somebody who knows their stuff.
Lots of academics they might be qualified, but it doesn't start from talking shite as well, Ciarán, in fairness. Yeah. Where will we start then? Do you want to start where, like, why we are where we are kind of stuff?
Yeah, like what do you think has led us to we're pretty much now at Celtic Tiger house prices again, and in a lot of parts of the country we're above it. So, like, is it just down to government policy that we got here? Is it down to any other external factors? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think government policy definitely is a huge part of the problem, but also behind policy is ideology. And, you know, it's very easy to blame successive ministers, and we've had a succession of, you know, not great ministers, if we put it politely, but behind that we've had the permanent civil service there in the background, effectively writing policy and bringing it to the minister. And I think that's the core of the problem, is the ideology of a lot of the civil servants who write that policy, and that ideology then gets translated into policy. Nearly every policy that we've had, so there's a huge relationship between planning and housing. Planning kind of facilitates the delivery of housing in many respects through regulating it and its supply. A lot of the planning changes that we've had in recent years have made housing actually more expensive and not less expensive. So building high, for example, we moved to building heights limits. It's expensive to build high, right? And the more units you can squeeze onto one site. So if I have a 10-story building, I can squeeze, say, 50 units. And if I've got a 20-story building, I can squeeze 100 units. The more units I can squeeze onto a site, the more valuable that land is. The more a builder has to pay for the land, the more expensive the output is going to be on the other end when they're finished, whether they're for rent or for sale. And the same with reducing, say, apartment sizes for build to rent. The more units you can squeeze on the land, the more expensive the land becomes, et cetera, et cetera. So we've had a plethora of planning policy changes at the behest of the property and development lobbying industry that have simply made housing even less affordable for everybody else. So that's partly part of the problem. The other, and related to that, I suppose, is the other thing that people don't really realize, is that although housing output has gone up a huge amount, since, say, 2016, 2017, it's gone up by nearly 45%. In the last 5 years or so. But actually, what has gone down is the amount of housing for sale that comes out of that increase, if you know what I mean. So the amount of houses that we're building for sale every year has gone down. So back in 2017, nearly half of all houses that we built come to the market. And that was about average, right? So people think that we build 20,000 houses appear in Shay Fitzgerald's window. They don't. You know, there's a lot of them are one-off houses, you know, your typical one-off bungalow down the country, whatever. And a lot of them are social houses. And that was typically it. Like, there was social housing, there was one-off housing, and then the rest, you know, typically housing estates. So nearly half of all houses used to come to the market about 5 years ago. It sounds like a different century now. Yeah. About it now. And last year that was less than 28%. And in numbers, that was about 5,700, 5,691, something like that, houses. So as
in
output has gone up,
in
numbers have gone down.
2021. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is in 2021, less than 6,000 houses were available. Is this homes now, houses and apartments?
This is how anything coming to the market,
Yeah,
but apartments don't come to the market really.
yeah, I know.
95%
Yeah,
of apartments are going to the funds. So last year was 5,698 houses, actually, houses, apartments, whatever, units came to the market. You know, that used to be 50% of all housing. So what's increased though, what you see, so housing output overall has increased. So you have the obvious question is now, like, what's driving the increase? And there's two things. One is social housing has increased. The proportion of housing that being used for social housing, new housing, has increased from about 11 or 12% to over a quarter now, 25% of houses. And that's not necessarily from councils building brand new houses, which you would like to think is, you know, would be great, but actually most of that is from them buying houses. So that for every house they build, new house they build, they're buying 2 brand new houses. Again, you could argue, and Charlie Weston in the Indo does argue regularly, from under the noses of first-time buyers. You know, councils are out for every one they build, they're buying 2. So that's one part that's driving the increase, and the other part that's driving the increase is build to rent, the institutional funds, and they've gone from about 10% of the housing output in 2017 to, again, nearly a quarter last year. And the problem with them, of course, is that, well, they're expensive and all that kind of stuff, but they're what they build doesn't come to the market. It's for rentals. And, you know, when you look at housing policy overall, the build to rent is a good example of it. We've put a lot of policy faith in a very niche and expensive product for a very niche group of people, which are the well-paid tech sector. And, you know, what happens to ordinary people then, the indigenous, you know, Dubliners or Galwegians or Corkonians or whatever, and they get squeezed out of the market hugely. And there's little mind paid to them, if you know what I mean. And it's, look, same thing happens in Seattle, same thing happens in San Francisco, but we've actively encouraged it here, which is kind of becoming a problem, I think.
And that goes back to the kind of tax breaks that the real estate investment trust get. So let's put some numbers on that, because I want to write this down. So let's say, so you said the change in the percentage, say from 2017 to 2021. What were the numbers in 2017 in terms of how many units that were built were going to rent? Say, how many built to rent was there in 2017 compared to now? Do you have those numbers there?
Yeah, well, built to rent was about 10% of all output in 2017. So that'd be, you know, 1,500 units, something like that. And last year it was a quarter, so it was more like, you know, 5,000 units, something like, you know, just over 5,000 units. So it's going up, like, the numbers are small, right? But the output is small. So as a percentage, it's quite high. The issue with these is that what we can see then, so that's the housing output numbers, right, from the CSO. So we can see that housing output for ordinary people is plummeting, right? And for wealthy people, it's on the increase, and social housing is on the increase. And we should never, you know, social housing, we need lots of social housing, to be honest with you. And that's a good thing. But where you see other things happening is if you start looking at who's buying what out there, and this kind of puts kind of flesh on it then as well. So you see, and the way to do that is to go to revenue and start looking at stamp duty transactions. So who's buying what, you know, how many units and all that kind of stuff. And we can see that, again, 5 years ago, the what are called now non-household transactions. So that's basically funds and local authorities, or, you know, approved housing bodies, everybody other than households, effectively. They were about 16% of all stamp duty transactions in 2017. And last year they were 41%. And first-time buyers then in 2017, they were like 54%, 53, 54%, and last year they were 36%. So nationally, you can see them going down. In Dublin, it gets even worse. In Dublin, the non-households have gone from like 36% to 65%. And your ordinary first-time buyers have gone from like 56% to 31%. It's like the inverse, if you know what I mean. So you can see that, like, I would argue that first-time buyers in particular, but everybody, has been kind of displaced by the advent of new housing types. And when you look at nationally, or indeed in Dublin, it's not just first-time buyers. We can see in Dublin that second-time buyers are movers, you know, so that's not necessarily older, middle-class or middle-aged people. It's, you know, some guy and a girl, a guy and a guy, or whatever, get together. I bought an apartment in their late 20s, early 30s, got together with somebody, want a house big enough for their needs. Their second-time buyers or movers or whatever, they're down like 46% in Dublin. So they're not moving because there's nowhere for them to go. So there's no churn in the market. So when you start to realise these kind of things, you see why prices are high and probably why they're staying high.
Yeah, and don't look to be coming down anytime soon. Not through good
No.
policy anyway, unless the economy shits its pants
Mm.
and we lose out that way. But
Yeah.
no one wants to see that. And I've been saying that for years. I want house prices to come down. I just bought a house. I don't care if the value of that house
Yeah.
drops, like, because I bought a home rather than an investment. But
Yeah.
but I've been saying it for years, like, we need these prices to come down, and it needs to be because of good policy rather than everyone losing their jobs again, which, like, it would be another recession in my adult lifetime. And I saw the devastation the last one caused, and I'm still personally dealing with it every day. So it's not what we want, but we want it to come down through good policies.
Yeah.
So I suppose, touching on that, like, so people that are listening to this now, they might want to go back and re-listen to those numbers again, because they're pretty devastating, like, for non-households. So that means non-owner occupiers, basically going from 16% 5 years ago to 41% of
Yeah.
all
That's nationally. Yeah. And it's even worse
nationally
in Dublin. Yeah.
of all transactions, and it's worse again in Dublin because of the amount of institutional funds, I suppose, involved in Dublin, and
Mm.
social housing being much more needed in Dublin than outside of
Yeah.
Dublin. So people
Yeah.
might want to go back and listen to those figures again, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
shocking. But where can we go? Like, what can be done, or what do you think, where lies the solution? I keep beating the vacant site levy, not so much vacant home tax, because I think they need to tax the value of the site and the land rather than just the house.
Yeah.
So maybe like a vacant site levy. But you're the qualified person in this. You have a PhD in all this. I know nothing. So am I wrong in that, or would that help, or what do you think? Like, what should be done?
Yeah, I think there's multiple strands to be honest with you, and you can start at the top and, like, the big kind of thinking shift that needs to happen, and then you move down to the meso level and the micro level. And at the micro level, we're dealing with things like introduction of a site value tax, a one-stop shop for converting the above the shop kind of units into accommodation, putting a bit of manners on the short-term lets, and actually enforcing that kind of rules, making the registry, the land registry, registry deeds, identification of property ownership easier. And I think we need a land price registry, because really we don't know what's going on in the land market, because we have no official statistics
And the
about it.
government voted.
Teagasc and
They voted that down recently. The government did. That was Keane O'Callaghan's bill, I know, but the government said
yeah,
no.
and I can't understand why they said no. Well, I can, but logically you can't understand why. At the macro top level, I think one of the big problems that has bedeviled housing policy is the idea that increasing supply is going to bring down prices. And I just put it out there, guys, right? For those of you who are listening, increasing the supply of housing would have to increase so much, all other things being equal, as the economists like to say, ceteris paribus, right? To bring down 1%, to bring down the house price by 1%. But of course, things are never equal, and we've got changing employment rates, wages, inflation, stagflation, deflation, different zoning, different people involved, the whole lot. So you can never rely on housing supply to bring down prices. It's not going to happen. And if you want to be really crude about it, like the bottom line is that builders don't build when prices are falling. So this economic dogma that seems to bedevil the policymakers, that if we build enough housing, prices will come down, is nonsense. It has never happened. And if you look at any housing stats from the CSO or whatever, there, go and look at them, and you'll see that as we built more houses, particularly up to the great economic unpleasantness, you'll see that house prices tracked them. You know what I mean? They went up with them. So builders won't build if prices are falling for a start. So there's time your supply, and you need to build. We need to build, all things being equal, we need to build 2 million houses in the country. We need to build 21,000 houses for prices to drop by 1%, right? By 1%. Now we're building 21,000 houses the last couple of years, but everything else isn't equal. And we have a war in Ukraine, and we have inflation, we have a whole lot of things. So that's never going to happen. And so until they get their heads around that at the top level, I think we're still going to be in a bad place. I think ultimately, and I've seen the figures, I know how much it costs to build an apartment, how much it costs to build a house. There is all roads seem to lead back to, in terms of control and quality and price and all that value for money, to the state getting much more involved in the development of housing itself. And it doesn't want, again, it's a kind of an ideological predisposition. It doesn't really want to do that. But no matter who you talk to, whether they're a property developer, whether they're an academic, whether they're whoever they are, architects, anything, when they do their analysis, all roads lead back to this. And it makes a lot of sense in many ways, because in the long term, in the medium to long term, if you can guarantee employment for the construction of, say, 8,000 houses a year by the state, and we used to do it for sale, not just for rent. Yeah, my father bought his first house from Kildare County Council and got the mortgage from them as well, back in 19, whatever it was. So we could do that, but you can guarantee that steady amount of employment through good times and bad. You can set up training programs for apprentices. You can do a whole lot of stuff with that, and it wouldn't compete then with the high-end housing that's also going to be built. So I think, all roads lead back to that, but there's an ideological problem with policymakers and particularly the kind of centre-righty politicians about the state getting involved, because they're very much into current expenditure and not into capital expenditure. So they think that if they built, 10,000 houses, it will cost them 300 grand a pop. Actually, housing, all you need is seed funding for housing. You build 100 houses, you sell them, you take the money, you build the next 100, you take the money, you build the next 100.
Yeah.
You don't need to rob the European Central Bank to do this.
Yeah. So, are you talking about setting up a government-run construction company, so to speak, that can build itself, or are you talking about the government acting as the developer and hiring private builders, say like O'Coulon, to build not-for-profit housing schemes on government land? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think the days of local authorities or the state having lads with shovels out there doing this stuff is gone. So what would happen, and what typically happens nowadays, when I say a council directly builds a house, it's not council workers. There's a QS and a project manager, quantity surveyor and a project manager, and they organise the contracts and they go out to tender, and CISC and Roadbridge and whoever will compete and stick in their tenders, and they'll build it for them. And I think that's what needs to happen. But when a lot of people don't seem to understand that, in the private market, a builder's margin, the sales price of a house bears no relationship to the cost of building it, right? So your builder's margin can be 10% or it can be 50%, depending on what they get from the market, what people are willing to pay for their house.
Well, this is what
building the house stays roughly the same.
That's what I was just about to say, because I see this a lot as well with the price of new builds. I've seen it nearly every day now, where the price has gone up and up and up for the next phase of development or whatever, and the builders will say it's gone up 60 grand a house because our costs have gone up, or they put up that POA, and often it goes up. But maybe this is just because I've been doing this so long now that I've just gotten so cynical, but maybe I'm thinking that it's because, let's say I'm a builder and I'm going to an estate agent and I've 50 houses in a new development for sale. My 10% margin, say, which would be standard, the house sale is 400 grand. Okay. But I get 500 applicants, 10 times more than the houses I have, who can afford 500 grand. So I'm going to put the price up to 500 grand.
With their help to buy loans. Yeah.
Exactly,
with their help to buy subsidies and everything else.
With the help to buy subsidies. So all of a sudden, now my profit has gone from being 10% to being, what's that, to 66%.
Yeah.
So, and it's am I wrong there, or is that actually what's happening?
No, you're absolutely right. Like, the worst thing that people can do, right, is register their interest in a housing development, because all you're doing then is gauging how many people are interested in my new house, and then you'll set the price based on that. And at a phase at a time, like 10 houses at a time, you're not going to set the price for all of them, because that would be crazy. So your builder's margin, so the cost of construction, again, a lot of people don't kind of get this. The cost of construction bears no relationship to the sales price. The cost of construction stays relatively stable all the time, but the sales price will fluctuate. So, but the point I was kind of starting to make there was that if you're a private developer, your profit margin is going to be 15 to 160,000 million%, depending on what sales price you get. If you're a builder, so I built on an extension on this house last year, a builder's margin, if they're doing work for you, is more like 5 to 7%, not 15 to 150%. So to employ them directly, and construction costs will fluctuate without doubt, but when you are working with a fixed profit margin, a fixed margin for these guys, well, then you have kind of certainty around the prices, and then you know what you can sell them on, and you don't need to build and pay for them all at once. The great thing about houses is you can build them in phases. Because one of the other things that's caused a huge amount of unaffordability in housing, and the wrong type of housing being built effectively, is the obsession with density and high rise. And policymakers confusing density with high rise. You can have really dense housing, without going above 3 stories, but yet there's an insistence on having really high buildings and going up, and that just makes construction more expensive, and then whatever comes out the other end, rents or sales prices are just going to be more expensive. So we've done things kind of wrong on particularly on the planning front.
So just on the height thing, because personally, I don't really care what height a building is, and I've never objected to anything in my life. I don't really.
You would if it was out your back garden, yeah.
But there is. I'm in the Tenters. Everything up around me is
Yeah.
huge. Like there's all like literally looking into my back garden is a whole new student accommodation. It doesn't bother me, to be honest. But what? So like people will, you hear this all the time. Like, why can't we go 15, 20, 25 stories? So what is the argument against that? Is that it doesn't actually make it cheaper because it increases the value of the site it's on. So people will end up paying more. Is that what you mean?
Also more expensive. Well, there's two things. One, it's really expensive to build. That's what goes down the stories gets really expensive. Also, we have fire issues. We haven't got a fire brigade ladder in Dublin that can go above 7 stories. So there's huge amounts, and we've reduced standards now, so you can have a single stairwell. So you imagine in a fire on the 10th floor, people coming down the stairwell at the same time as Dublin Fire Brigade are trying to go up the stairwell in the middle of the night in smoke and darkness, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of secondary. But what it does, it's very expensive to build. So you're not going to make housing, you're not going to build housing that is affordable for anybody if you're going high, right? So it's all kind of niche product. But the other thing that it does is that, so you're in the Templars and there's, you know, a multi-story, say, apartment block beside you. All the land now around you in the Templars has now gone up in value because they squeeze more units on it. So that means it limits the pool of people who have the potential to buy those sites, which means there's a lack of competition, which means there's only a handful of people in Ireland who have the deep pockets to buy those. And they typically are the funds. You don't have to go to the banks for money. And they only want to build one thing, which is built to rent. So it's an EU report from a couple of years ago that said one of the problems with our housing market here is a lack of competition. And that's what they were referring to. You know, we've made the SME builders in Ireland who do your traditional housing and all that kind of stuff are they're basically been excluded because, you know, they don't have the deep pockets to go in and compete with, you know, the large ones.
Yeah. Right, interesting. Okay, a lot to unpick there.
You know, there's a huge amount. My head gets fried on a regular basis trying to unpick it and make sense of it, you know.
I get like that as well. I get very overwhelmed with it sometimes. I just have to turn off, just put the phone away. So in terms of what can I do or what can people do? Like I understand that my page now has somewhat of like, I don't like the word, but somewhat of like, say, an influence in terms of people come to me and they're like, what can I do? Who do I email? What can I do in terms of trying to get a seismic shift here in terms of policy making, in terms of trying to get people to just get it? Because like most things in life, people don't get it unless they're in the trenches and trying to buy a home. Or I'm getting a lot of people messaging me saying maybe their kids have now started to look and now they get it. They're like, Jesus, now I understand how hard it is.
But you know, Kieran, you shouldn't have to get it effectively. Like citizens, like the same way citizens shouldn't have to take judicial reviews. Citizens shouldn't have to understand the nuances that you and me understand of the housing system. You know what I mean? They shouldn't have to. It's complicated. It involves construction, planning, finance, management, procurement, all that kind of stuff. And they shouldn't have to understand that. There should be an available supply of housing, not necessarily, you know, it's not going to be in abundance, but in a wealthy country with only 5 million people, like we're the size of a small city, you'd think we'd be able to supply a decent amount of housing for people. You know, I'm not saying flooding the place with huge housing estates. I'm saying just a reasonable amount. I think when people come to you, I think the thing they can press their politicians for at the door or however they do it is the number of houses coming on the market for sale is now down below 6,000, even though output is rocketing. Well, you know, it's increasing nearly 50% in the last 5 years. That's a statistic that the politicians find really hard to defend. Okay. That they've let a free for all for anything else, except they've kind of ignored your average person on an average wage in an average household. They're, you know, gone. You know what I mean? They're of no interest. Anybody between 36 and 90 grand as a household is in real trouble.
Yeah, and that's something I've been saying for a long time, is especially in Dublin, because as a teacher, I see it every day. We cannot get staff, we cannot get subs. any newly qualified teachers are leaving the country. They're gone over to the Middle East because they get 3 times the income. They don't pay any tax. They have a nicer lifestyle. They get the sun. They go to their brunch, whatever, every week. And then in a few years, they look at coming home with a couple of $100,000 saved up. So like a lot of the substitute teaching we're getting at the moment. So usually you would have experienced teachers coming in. Every single sub now is a student teacher, which is great, and it's great that they're able to make a few quid now. But like they're unqualified, and we shouldn't be relying on them to fill the holes in an entire profession. And that's like because people they can't afford to live in Dublin, and teachers can't afford to live here. So
but the housing policy, like, it's so embedded in how we live, because we all need a house. Right? It has knock-on effects everywhere. And the one line that I use, that, and maybe people might hopefully remember it, is that good housing policy is good social policy. It's also good economic policy, it's good education policy, it's good health policy, it's good transport policy, it's all that. And housing is at the center of that. So if we had good policy, you wouldn't be having the issues that you're having in your school. Yeah. You know what I mean? And and the economists in particular are really bad at recognizing the links between health and housing, between equality and housing, gender and housing, right? Between transport and housing planning, all that kind of stuff. So there's more to housing than money. It's a system. I never really refer to it as a market because it's a system. It's an ecosystem in itself, you know.
That's a good, housing system rather than housing market. But I guess that's kind of where we're going, aren't we, in Dublin, in terms of people just can't afford to live here. They're priced out of it. So who's going to run the hospitals? Where are the nurses going to live? Where are the guards going to live? Where's your barista going to live? Where's the people that work in Lidl and wherever you go, you do your shop? Like where are they all going to live if we're so expensive?
I tell you where they're living. Well, A, they go home, but B, where they're living is like the largest number of new houses that are getting built is all in the commuter belts, and they're houses that are for sale because there's nothing being built for sale that's vaguely affordable within the M50, right? But this is housing policy going forward in reverse here, right? But that idea of building houses that's all car based, right, out in Kildare and Meath and Louth and all those places, right, is contrary to our climate emissions targets and the national planning framework. Yeah. So, like, housing policy is actively acting against other government policies, which is crazy. You know, there's no point in having an A1 passive house, BR rated passive, really cool graph if you've got 2 diesel BMW cars sitting outside the door. Because you go one way and she goes the other way every morning, and you know, because there's no decent public transport.
Totally agree. And I suppose another thing that I'm seeing a lot online, you're dead right to get off Twitter a few years ago. I need to get off myself. I don't even put time into it, and every time I go on, there's another 1,000 followers on there. But what I see a lot is there's this narrative out there at the moment that the reason prices are so high is because people keep objecting to developments, people keep objecting the NIMBYism or whatever is causing this. Now, I don't think that's the case, because I think there are like over 40,000 planning applications granted that just aren't being built because the value of the site keeps going up and up, and the longer they delay building, the more valuable the site is, and then they can flip it. Say they bought it for 300,000, they can now flip it for 3 million. That kind of thing that the Kenny report showed up in 1970.
Speculation, we call it here. Speculation.
So, like, what is the counter argument to that? Like, I don't think it is NIMBYism that's driving up prices.
Of course, it's not. NIMBYism itself is an offensive term. It's called public participation. You know, and we all have a right to do that. We're holding power to account. That's one of that's part of your social contract, that people like you and I can hold power to account. And one of the ways we do that is by challenging people. And we have every right to do that. It's a disgrace that people have to take judicial reviews. It's a disgrace that people have to take judicial reviews, go to the High Court. Ordinary citizens in residence groups who mightn't have any money at all. That's an absolute disgrace that they even have to do that. And it shows you that it's really bad planning policy, and it's not kind of NIMBYism or you know, people taking judicial reviews, because on Board Pleanála have lost or conceded over 90% of every judicial review that's been taken against a strategic housing development. So that's bad planning policy. That's not people objecting to it. But you're right, there's like planning permission extent, like there's existing planning permission there for tens of thousands of units that have never been built. And what they've got with the fast track planning system was fast track land speculation.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the idea, and now the plan is to shut down people, routes for people to go and actually challenge these kind of stuff. That's anti-democratic, but it's wrong. Like people like, it's a journalist diktat more than academics, but you comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Like, and being able to challenge people and hold people to account is really important. And you see the debacle now in Barcelona.
Yeah.
What's going on there, and that's more of it. That's just bad governance on many levels. And why shouldn't people be able to hold these people to account? And it should be easier for them in countries that have a relatively functioning housing system, and where houses actually gets built. We're determined to shut down public participation here. In countries where it works, where the planning and housing system works and they turn out houses, there's more public participation, not less. And they do it earlier and they do it more often. So when the planning application goes in, there's no objections.
So you're
We're determined
talking
to do the opposite.
You're talking cities like, say, Vienna, where else?
Antwerp.
Like Antwerp.
Yeah, those kind of cities. Yeah, that have it. Freiburg, those places. You do public participation, and you do more of it. And you do earlier. Not this token stuff that a lot of the guys do, particularly where you live, where they'll come around and have an evening in a community hall or school hall, and they'll basically show you their plans and bamboozle you with glossy photographs of what they're going to build. And to put that down as consultation, that's not consultation. Consultation is where there's kind of equal power between people. That's just telling you what we're going to do. So you need proper consultation, and you need plenty of it. And then, the system works really well. But we're determined to do worst practice, not best practice, by shutting down, people's ability to participate. And a lot of it is like, the development and investment, lobby complaining about this, but there's no evidence behind it. When you go and look at the statistics about objections and things like that, there's no evidence. And the other thing is they all do it. Fine Gael will have a lash at Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil will have a lash at Fine Gael or Sinn Féin or whatever, right? But you go back to the objections on the Burton Law website, and you find every political party. Leo Varadkar objected. Joan Burton, when she was there, there's loads of them object to all sorts of things.
Yeah, and that's like one thing I always get really annoyed with, because whenever I get asked on, like, say, talk shows or whatever, and there's a couple of politicians there, it happens every single time. It's like it ends up just being the two politicians taking cracks at each other, and no one actually talks about the issue that was at hand. No one talks about solutions. No one talks about what we should do. It's just them going, well, you object to this and you object to this, and it's just nothing ever gets done. Like,
they can talk down the clock down. You see, they can, you know what I mean. There's no time to discuss it, because I find a lot of the politicians that go on the air, and I don't go head to head. It's not my role in life to go head to head with politicians. But if I listen to them, or if I'm in like the late debate or one of those things, they're generally clueless, or they're regurgitating stuff that either some policy person or a special advisor has given them, which is invariably wrong and taken from some website or something like that. We need to build loads of houses and that'll bring down prices. And you're banging your head against the mantelpiece listening to this on the radio. Like,
I know.
That doesn't work anywhere. But yet they churn out the same amounts, because they're generally quite ill-educated on this.
Yeah, right. Lorcan, you're a legend.
It's fun as always.
Thanks so much. I could talk to you for hours about this, but I won't keep you any longer. I need you to come back maybe on Twitter and just help us out, because fight the good fight, because it's not really getting anywhere at the moment. But look, I get it. I really appreciate it. You have some really good figures and stuff. I might try and get some of them off you and jot them down, or maybe a couple of images or whatever to put under the post, so people can, because I always find when I listen to these things and numbers get thrown out, I'm like, I need to see them, visually as well.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I know I have a lot of data there, and I get excited when they start throwing it out. But the general trend isn't good, folks.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Lorcan, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks, Kieran.
A massive thank you to Lorcan for having that chat with me there. I know it's a really hard listen. It's very depressing, but these are the facts, really, and this is the reality when it comes to new builds in Ireland. They are just pretty much unattainable. We can't compete against local authorities or councils or investment funds. It's just it's too difficult for regular people. And when there's so few homes available for us, new homes available for us to buy, that puts all the pressure on the second-hand market. So it gives you an idea as to why we are where we are, why things are so bad. And unfortunately, doesn't look to be getting any better anytime soon. But other than that, very depressing start to the podcast. I want to run through some of your questions. So I'll give you a rundown of the questions that were sent in. So question one is, can a first time buyer buy a house at an auction? Question two is advice for switching your mortgage. Question three is, should I go for a mortgage broker or direct to the bank? Question four is, if you own a property abroad, can you avail of Help to Buy? And question five is, where do you think the best value in Ireland is right now? So, question one, can a first time buyer buy a house at an auction? Yeah, you absolutely can. The problem with auctions are, it is usually, if you win the highest bid, that's it. You have to buy that house. It's not like your regular process where you go sale agreed, and if issues arise, you can back out. It's pretty much you're signing the contract there and then. So it is usually advised that first time buyers stay away from auctions, or properties being sold at auction, because if usually when they're being auctioned off, there tends to be an issue with that property, whether it's title issues, whether it's a planning issue, whether there's mica or pyrite or whatever. There's usually an issue with that house, which means it hasn't sold for whatever reason, and maybe it's not mortgageable, maybe a bank won't lend on it. So it's something to be aware of. I personally, as a first time buyer, I wouldn't go near a house at an auction. I just think there are too many issues that can arise. Now, that's not to say people haven't had success with it, and you might get a house, or a home for a better price really than you would on the open market, but it just really depends on the house. But personally, I would just avoid auctions, just as a blanket kind of thing, because just I've heard so many horror stories of it, and as I said, you're on the hook then straight away. Question two, then, advice for switching your mortgage. So if you go to my page, you will see a post on this that goes really into detail on exactly what you need to do to switch your mortgage. And I will do a full podcast episode on this because I think it's so important. You can save so much money by switching your mortgage, especially if you're on a variable higher rate. And chances are you have a lot more equity in your home now because the value of it's gone up through the roof over the last few years. So I always recommend people switch their mortgage. And usually the worry is around, if you're in a fixed rate, there will often be a kind of a breakout penalty there. But it's not always the case. So for example, we just drew down in September, and we're looking to switch now because we want to go for switch to a green mortgage, and we actually don't have a breakout fee on ours. So it's worth just getting on to your lender and seeing, is there a fee to break out of that fixed term if you're in a fixed term. If you're in a variable rate, then absolutely switch your mortgage. You can save hundreds a month. Go to like a comparison site and see what you can get for yours. So you can basically need to make sure you have a certain amount of equity in your home, and what have you. But it's just like, literally, it's fairly straightforward. Now, you will need to pay solicitors' fees. It shouldn't be as much as a standard kind of purchase of a home. When switching the mortgage, the professional fees shouldn't be as bad because your solicitor will have already done all the search things and all when you were buying the house, or the apartment or whatever. So definitely something I would advise everybody to do is look at what the best rates are for you. Avan tend to be quite low rate, especially with the way things are with the ECB. Interest rates are going up and up, so definitely lock in a fixed term and switch your mortgage. And as I said, you will have a lot more equity in your home now than you did a while ago. And question three is kind of along the same lines of that. Should you go to a mortgage broker or direct to a bank? And again, the you can find great success with either. I personally used a mortgage broker, and it meant that we could get an exception because the benefit of the broker is they know all the lenders on the market. They know who have exceptions still to give out. If you need an exception, they know which lender might suit your circumstances best. But I've also heard of people having great success going straight to a bank after having a nightmare with a broker. So it really depends, I think, on how organized you are, how clued in you are, how educated you are in terms of what you actually need to have ready, and if you have a good credit history and all the rest. If you're self-employed, I've heard people having better success going straight to a bank than with a broker. So I guess it really kind of depends on your own situation. I hate answering questions with it depends, but I mean, you can have great success with either. Personally, I used a mortgage broker for our mortgage, and now with the switcher, we're looking to switch now to the green rate, and I'm going direct to the bank for that. So I'm actually going to EBS because I did a seminar with them. I did a chat with them, and I got chatting to the girl there, and she gave me some great advice. So we're switching to a variable rate, and we're going to get cash back. You get 2% cash back, and then we switch to the green rate and lock it in for 4 years. So it's a bit of a no brainer, really. So that's what we are doing. So I guess I could say I've had success with both. But initially, for us, the mortgage broker, we used Mortgage 123, and they were excellent. Sean in there, and he really did help us a lot, and he made sure that we got our exception. Now, exceptions I know aren't as easy for everybody. We're two teachers with permanent jobs, so we are the kind of golden couple for a lender. And I did all my research, and as you know, if you follow me on my page, I did the saving 1.3 times and blah blah blah. So I made it so that I just knew in advance, because I've done so much research. I made it easy for the lender to say yes to the exception, basically. So to answer the question, you can have great success with either. The good thing about a broker is they will usually get their fee from the lender, so you don't usually have to pay them anything. So it's probably a bit of a no-brainer, really, to use a broker initially, and then if you're a little bit more confident and you know your stuff, then you could go direct to the bank if you know which bank will suit you the best. Question 4: if I owned a property abroad, can I avail of the Help to Buy grant? No, you can't. So if you've ever had a mortgage on any property, whether it's in Ireland or another country, you cannot avail of the Help to Buy grant because you're not a first-time buyer. There is an exception on this. If you inherited the home, then you may be able to get first-time buyer status from a lender. That means you may be able to get the 10% deposit exception, but I don't think you can apply for the Help to Buy grant on the new build. But I would definitely look into that and apply and check it out on Citizens Information or whatever, or talk to a broker. But if you had a mortgage on any property, whether it's in Ireland or abroad, you cannot avail of the first time buyer status or the Help to Buy grant. And the last question: where do you think the best value in Ireland is right now? Isn't that a question everybody wants to know the answer to? Personally, well, obviously it's hard to find value anywhere, but personally, I think houses in Wexford and Waterford are pretty good value, considering you're right by the sea. The weather's really nice. I have a bit of a soft spot for Wexford because we're going there my whole life, and I just love it down there. But some of the houses you can find down there are outrageous. Like I was looking at one in Wexford the other day with a swimming pool. The solar panels heat the water, and it's a stunning house. And it was like, I think, 600 grand. And then you look at what that gets you in Dublin, and it's just like no comparison. And I think the great thing about Wexford is it's only an hour and a half down the road if you lived in Dublin, or if your family are in Dublin or whatever. So I'm sure you can find little nuggets here and there throughout the country, but personally, I just think the old sunny southeast is a decent value at the moment compared to elsewhere. Agus Shinne for the questions on episode 1. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate all the good feedback I got from the trailer. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, please subscribe and share and review and all of those things that other podcasts tell you to do. Do them for me as well, please. I don't really know what it is, to be honest. I've never left a review. I don't even know how to do it, but if you do, I would appreciate it. And if you want to support the podcast and the page and get extra podcasts and extra content, you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/crazy house prices, or the link in my bio in my Instagram. My Patreon community are amazing, and I just am so grateful for them. Without them, the page would have shut down a long time ago. So I've loads and loads. I've about 50 or 60 podcasts over there on the Patreon with experts, with mortgage brokers, with estate agents, with solicitors, with architects, There's loads of stuff over there on the Patreon that go really in depth on everything to do with buying a house, and I have other stuff up there like the letter we used to buy our house off market and all the rest. So have a look, head over to Patreon and support the podcast and the Instagram page if you can. I would really appreciate it. And have a great week. Slán go fóill.